Hello viewers, I hope you must be keeping well. In the previous lecture we spoke about circular flow diagram, and in today's lecture we're going to talk about 10 most important principles of economics. There is no mystery to what an economy is, whether we are talking about the economy of a particular city, of a country, or of the whole world. An economy is just a group of people interacting with one another as they go about their lives. Because the behavior of an economy reflects the behavior of the individuals who make up the economy, we are going to start a study of economics with 4 principles of how individuals make decisions. The first important principle is people face trade-offs. As it is said that there is no such thing as a free lunch. To get one thing that we like, we usually have to give up another thing that we like. Making decisions requires trading off one goal against another. Consider a student who must decide how to allocate her most valuable resource, her time. She can spend all of her time studying economics. She can spend all of her time studying psychology, or she can divide her time between the two fields. For every hour she studies one subject, she gives up an hour she could have used studying the other. And for every hour she spends studying, she gives up an hour that she could have spent maybe napping, bike riding, watching TV, or working at her part-time job for some extra money. The most important trade-off that society faces is between efficiency and equity. Efficiency means that society is getting the most it can from its scarce resources. Equity means that the benefits of those resources are distributed fairly among society's members. So in other words, efficiency refers to the size of the economic pie, and equity refers to how the pie is divided. Often when government policies are being designed, these two goals conflict. Consider, for instance, policies aimed at achieving a more equal distribution of economic well-being. Some of these policies, such as the welfare system or unemployment insurance, try to help those members of society who are most in need. Others, such as the individual income tax, ask the financially successful to contribute more than others to support the government. Although these policies have the benefit of achieving greater equity, they have a cost in terms of reduced efficiency. When the government redistributes income from the rich to the poor, it reduces the reward for working hard. As a result, people work less and produce fewer goods and services. In other words, when the government tries to cut the economic pie into more equal slices, the pie gets smaller. So you can either have more efficiency and less equity, or more equity and less efficiency. The second most important principle is the cost of something is what you give up to get it. Because people face trade-offs, making decisions requires comparing the costs and benefits of alternative courses of action. In many cases, however, the cost of some action is not as obvious as it might first appear. Consider, for example, the decision whether to go to college. The benefit is intellectual enrichment and a lifetime of better job opportunities. But what is the cost? To answer this question, you might be tempted to add up the money you spend on tuition, books, rooms, and board. Yet this total does not truly represent what you give up to spend a year in college. The first problem with the answer is that it includes some things that are not really cost of going to college. Even if you quit school, you would need a place to sleep and food to eat. Room and board are cost of going to college only to the extent that they are more expensive at college than elsewhere. Indeed, the cost of room and board at your school might be less than the rent and food expenses that you would have paid living on your own. In this case, the savings on room and board are a benefit of going to college. The second problem with this calculation of cost is that it ignores the largest cost of going to college. and that is your time. When you spend a year listening to lectures, reading textbooks, and writing papers, you cannot spend that time working at a job. For most students, the wages given up to attend school are the largest single cost of their education. The opportunity cost of an item is what you give up to get that item. When making any decision, such as whether to attend college, decision makers should be aware of the opportunity cost that accompany each possible action. In fact, they usually are. College-age athletes who can earn millions if they drop out of school and play professional sports are well aware that their opportunity cost of college is very high. It is not surprising that they often decide that the benefit is not worth the cost. The third principle is rational people think at the margin. Decisions in life are rarely black and white, but usually involve shades of gray. Economists use the term marginal changes to describe small incremental adjustments to an existing plan of action. Keeping in mind that margin means edge, for marginal changes are adjustments around the edges of what you are doing. In many situations, people make the best decisions by thinking at the margin. Consider an airline deciding how much to charge passengers who fly standby. Suppose that flying a 200-seat plane across the country costs the airline $100,000. In this case, the average cost of each seat is $500. One might be tempted to conclude that the airline should never sell a ticket for less than $500. In fact, however, the airline can raise the profits by thinking at the margin. Imagine that a plane is about to take off with 10 empty seats, and a standby passenger is waiting at the gate willing to pay $300 for a seat. Should the airline sell it to him or not? Of course it should. If the plane has empty seats, the cost of adding one more passenger is very small. Although the average cost of flying a passenger is $500, the marginal cost is merely the cost of the bag of peanuts and a can of soda that the extra passenger will consume. As long as the standby passenger pays more, then the marginal cost selling him a ticket is profitable. A rational decision maker takes an action if and only if the marginal benefit of the action exceeds the marginal cost. The fourth principle is people respond to incentives. Now, what are incentives? Incentives are things that motivate or encourage someone to do something. Because people make decisions by comparing cost and benefits, their behavior may change when the cost or benefits changes. That is, people respond to incentives when the price of an apple rises. For instance, people decide to eat more pears and fewer apples because the cost of buying an apple is higher. At the same time, apple orchards decide to hire more workers and harvest more apples because the benefit of selling an apple is also higher. The effect of price on the behavior of buyers and sellers in the market is crucial for understanding how the economy works. Public policymakers should never forget about incentives, for many policies change the cost or benefit that people face and therefore alter behavior. A tax on petrol, for instance, encourages people to drive smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. It also encourages people to take public transportation rather than drive and to live closer to where they work. If the tax were large enough, people would start driving electric cars maybe. The first four principles discussed were about individuals' decision making. The next three principles concern how people interact with one another. For the fifth principle, if trade can make everyone better off. You must have heard on the news that Japan and US are competitors in the world economy. Ford and Toyota compete for the same customers in the market for automobiles. Compaq and Toshiba compete for the same customers in the market for personal computers. Yet it is easy to be mild when thinking about competition among countries. Trade between the US and Japan is not like a sports contest where one side wins and the other side loses. In fact, the opposite is true. Trade between two countries can make each country better off. Trade can also affect your family. When a member of your family looks for a job, he or she competes against members of other families who are looking for jobs. Families also compete against one another when they go shopping because each family wants to buy the best goods at the lowest prices. So in a sense, each family in the economy is competing with all other families. Countries as well as families benefit from the ability to trade with one another. Trade allows countries to specialize in what they do best and to enjoy a greater variety of goods and services. The Japanese as well as the French and the Egyptians and the Brazilians are as much as partners of US in the world economy as their competitors. Principle number 6. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Today, most countries that once had centrally planned economies have abandoned the system and are trying to develop market economies. Now, what is a market economy? In a market economy, the decisions of a central planner are replaced by the decisions of millions of firms and households. Firms decide whom to hire and what to make. Households decide which firms to work for and what to buy with their incomes. These firms and households interact in the marketplace where prices and self-interest guides their decisions. At first glance, the success of market economies is quite puzzling. After all, in a market economy, no one is looking out for the economic well-being of society as a whole. Free markets contain many buyers and sellers of numerous goods and services, and all of them are interested primarily in their own well-being. Yet, despite decentralized decision-making and self-interested decision-makers, market economies have proven remarkably successful in organizing economic activity in a way that promotes overall economic well-being. Free markets are controlled by an invisible hand. What is an invisible hand? The unobservable market force that helps the demand and supply of goods in free market to reach equilibrium automatically is the invisible hand. The phrase invisible hand was introduced by Adam Smith in his book The Wealth of Nations. He assumed that an economy can work well in a free market scenario where everyone will work for her own interest. He explained that an economy will comparatively work and function well if the government will leave people alone to buy and sell freely among themselves. He suggested that if people were allowed to trade freely, self-interested traders present in the market would compete with each other, leading markets towards the positive output with the help of an invisible hand. In a free market scenario, where there are no regulations or restrictions imposed by the government, if someone charges less, the customer will buy from him. Therefore, you have to lower your price or offer something better than your competitor. Whenever enough people demand something, it will be supplied by the market and everyone will be happy. The seller ends up getting the price and the buyer will get better goods at the desired price. So, in other words, we can say that price is actually the invisible hand that controls the market. The seventh principle is governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. Although markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity, this rule has some important exceptions. There are two broad reasons for a government to intervene in the economy: to promote efficiency and to promote equity. That is, most policies aim either to enlarge the economic pie or to change how the pie is divided. The invisible hand usually leads markets to allocate resources efficiently. Nonetheless, for various reasons, the invisible hand sometimes does not work. Economists use the term market failure to refer to a situation in which the market on its own fails to allocate resources efficiently. One possible cause of market failure is an externality. An externality is the impact of one person's actions on the well-being of a bystander. The classic example of an external cost is pollution. If a chemical factory does not bear the entire cost of the smoke it emits, it will likely emit too much. Here, the government can raise economic well-being through environmental regulation. Another possible cause of market failure is market power. Market power refers to the ability of a single person or maybe a small group of people to unduly influence market prices. For example, suppose that everyone in town needs water, but there is only one well. The owner of the well has market power, in this case a monopoly over the sale of water. The well owner is not subject to the rigorous competition with which the invisible hand normally keeps self-interest in check. Regulating the price that the monopolist charges can potentially enhance economic efficiency, and this is done by the government. The invisible hand is even less able to ensure that economic prosperity is distributed fairly. A market economy rewards the people according to their ability to produce things that other people are willing to pay for. The last three principles concern the workings of the economy as a whole. The eighth principle is a country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. The difference in living standards around the world are staggering. Changes in living standards over time are also large. In the United States, income have historically grown about 2% per year. At this rate, average income doubles every 35 years. Over the past century, average income have risen about eightfold. What explains these large differences in living standards among countries and over time? The answer is very simple. Almost all variation in living standards is attributable to differences in countries' productivity. And what is productivity? The amount of goods and services produced from each hour of a worker's time. In nations where workers can produce a large quantity of goods and services per unit of time, most people enjoy a high standard of living. In nations where workers are less productive, most people must endure a more meager existence. Similarly, the growth rate of a nation's productivity determines the growth rate of its average income. The larger the income, the better the standard of living. The relationship between productivity and living standards also have profound implications for public policy. When thinking about how any policy will affect living standards, the key question is how it will affect our ability to produce goods and services. To boost living standards, policymakers need to raise productivity by ensuring that workers are well educated, have the tools needed to produce goods and services, and have access to the best available technology. Principle number 9. Prices rise when the government prints too much money. So what is inflation? Inflation is an increase in the overall level of prices in the country. What causes inflation? In almost all cases of large or persistent inflation, the culprit turns out to be the same: growth in the quantity of money. When a government creates large quantities of nation's money, the value of the money falls. In Germany in early 1920s, when prices were on average tripling every month, the quantity of money was also tripling every month. Although less dramatic, the economic history of the US points to a similar conclusion. The high inflation of the 1970s was associated with rapid growth in the quantity of money, and low inflation of the 90s was associated with slow growth in the quantity of money. Principle number 10. Society faces a short-run trade-off between inflation and unemployment. If inflation is so easy to explain, why do policymakers sometimes have trouble ridding the economy of it? One reason is that reducing inflation is often thought to cause a temporary rise in unemployment. The curve that illustrates this trade-off between inflation and unemployment is called the Phillips curve, after the economist who first examined this relationship. Over a period of a year or two, many economic policies push inflation and unemployment in opposite directions. Policymakers face this trade-off regardless of whether inflation and unemployment both start out at high levels or someplace in between, or maybe at low levels. Why do we face this short-run trade-off? According to common explanation, it arises because some prices are slow to adjust. Suppose, for example, that the government reduces the quantity of money in the economy. In the long run, the only result of this policy change will be a fall in the overall level of prices. Yet not all prices will adjust immediately. It may take several years before all firms issue new catalogs, all unions make wage concessions, and all restaurants print new menus. That is, prices are said to be sticky in the short run. Because prices are sticky, various types of government policy have short-run effects that differ from their long-run effects. When the government reduces the quantity of money, for instance, it reduces the amount that people spend. Lower spending together with prices that are stuck too high reduces the quantity of goods and services that firms sell. Lower sales in turn causes firms to lay off workers. Thus, the reduction in the quantity of money raises unemployment temporarily until prices have fully adjusted to the change. I hope that today's lecture is clear to you. If you have any queries, you can post in the comments.